I remember that morning as if it had just happened yesterday. Monday, early June. Austin was heavy and hot, but blazing bright. I got up early like I always did, brewed a cup of black coffee so strong a spoon could stand upright in it. The only thing I ever let myself get addicted to. Work, on the other hand, had long been addicted to me. I used to be the lead engineer at Novamind Technologies, the medical AI company famous for its Helix system, the one I spent 10 years of my life building. A child born of caffeine, code, and a little bit of madness. Helix understood patients better than doctors did, at least when the doctor wasn't half asleep on a 16-hour shift. That morning, I had just opened my laptop, hadn't even finished reading my emails, when a notification popped up. Private meeting with Jonathan Pierce at 7:30 in the morning. Bring your laptop. Jonathan Pierce, CEO, founder. The kind of man who walked into a room as if even the air should move aside. I'd known Jonathan since the early days when Novamind had only 4 people and a server that roared like a tractor. Back then, he was sharp, funny, and a brilliant engineer. But once the investors arrived, he learned a new skill: strategic arrogance. I thought it was just going to be a routine quarterly planning meeting. Turned out it was the end of an era and the start of a farce. Novamind's building in downtown Austin blazed with light that morning, as if the sun itself wanted to watch the show. I stepped into the elevator at 7:22, inhaling the smell of polished wood and cheap Starbucks drifting through the halls. One small detail caught my eye. 2 fresh cappuccinos sat steaming outside Jonathan's office door, perfectly lined up like props in a scene called Sharing Success. Only that morning, the success belonged to someone else. I walked in. Jonathan was standing there, smiling that half smile of his, the one that always set off my alarms. Emma, your coffee. I've got something special for you today. I set my laptop down, still polite. A new project? He shook his head, pacing around the desk with his cup like some self-appointed professor reciting Shakespeare. Not a project, a person. My nephew, Tyler Pierce, just joined the company. I want you to train him. I almost choked on my coffee. Train him? You want me to teach him to code Helix? Jonathan nodded, completely serious, as if he were talking about saving the world. Tyler has a creative vision. He graduated with honors in digital media. I believe he'll bring new energy to Novamind. All you need to do is guide him a little. A little. I'd heard that phrase used many times to describe squeezing someone dry. I gave a thin smile. Jonathan, Helix is a medical system built on real patient data. This isn't some summer workshop for kids fresh off TikTok. His eyebrows tightened. Emma, I think you're overreacting. This is a direct request from me, and I'm telling you it's reckless and meaningless. I can't let someone who doesn't know how to write a for loop touch a system handling millions of medical records. If Tyler wants to learn, he can start with the basic training team. The air in the room turned heavy. The clock ticked to 7:56. Jonathan slammed his cup down so hard it rattled like it knew something bad was about to happen. Emma, he said, voice dropping low, sometimes you forget who owns this company. I looked him straight in the eye. Maybe. But owning a company doesn't mean you understand how it runs. If looks could kill, I'd have been a relic on the spot. He took a slow breath and hit the intercom. HR, come to my office. Right now. I gave a quiet laugh, the kind people mistake for weakness. But it is really a calculation beginning. You're firing me? Exactly. You're no longer a fit for the company culture. His voice was cold, deliberate, confident, like he was unveiling some grand monument to stupidity. Company culture, or family culture. He didn't answer. I packed up my laptop, stood up. At the doorway, I turned back, looking at the man who thought he'd just cleared the biggest obstacle from his path. Jonathan, I said softly, your company might be fine without me. But Helix, not so much. I walked out, my heels tapping against the marble floor like a countdown clock. The elevator doors closed at exactly 7:59. I pulled out my phone, logged into the Helix system dashboard. The screen flashed. License active. Owner, Reed Labs, LLC. I smiled. My coffee had gone cold, but my blood hadn't. Strange how being fired could feel like freedom. Inside my head, my heartbeat sounded slow, clear, steady. I leaned back against the elevator wall, catching my reflection in the stainless steel. And then a thought flickered through me. I wonder where you're listening to my story right now, on your commute home, sitting in a parking lot, or sipping coffee on the other side of the country. If you've ever had a Jonathan in your life, someone who thinks they can order you around like they're calling drinks at a bar, believe me, I get it. I've stood exactly where you are. The only difference is that this morning I'm not afraid anymore. Because sometimes to get yourself back, you have to let them cross your name off their list with their own hand. And that, my friend, is when everything truly begins. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, the morning air of Austin rushed in. The smell of asphalt, exhaust, and burnt coffee beans blended into that familiar scent only people who've lived here long enough can recognize. I stepped out without looking back. Behind me, Novamind's glass tower glared in the sunlight, as if it were staring at its own reflection one last time before collapsing. On the drive home, I turned on the radio but heard nothing. My mind was spinning around one thing only: Helix, the child I had just left behind, or rather, the one they only thought they owned. Helix wasn't an ordinary piece of software. It was a fully integrated machine learning platform capable of analyzing millions of medical records to predict diseases earlier than any system on the market. I had written its first lines of code 10 years ago, back when Novamind was nothing more than a cramped room with 3 wobbly IKEA desks and a leaky air conditioner. Back then, Jonathan Pierce was still a driven engineer who believed in science and the dream of saving lives. And I believed in Jonathan. That was my first mistake. 3 years later, when Novamind got its first investment, I started to notice something shifting. Jonathan talked less about technology and more about valuation. He stopped calling Helix a platform and started calling it a product to be sold. I remember one evening he said, "Emma, we need to commercialize fast. Investors want to see revenue." I looked at him, then at the monitor where Helix was running its newest algorithm. Helix isn't ready. It needs to understand the data better before it makes diagnostic predictions. If it's wrong, it's people's lives at stake, not numbers on a report. He just laughed. "You're overthinking it. Patients don't die from a few percentage points of error." I didn't answer. I just stayed quiet and started building a plan to protect the only thing that truly mattered: the core algorithm of Helix. I founded a small company, Reed Labs, LLC, under my name and my mother's. At first, it was only a legal shell to hold my personal patents in case the company ever went under. But over time, I realized it was the only armor I had to keep control of my own mind's work. The entire core algorithm, the thing Helix couldn't function without, was licensed to Novamind under one condition. It remained valid only as long as I was officially employed. If I quit or get fired, the license automatically expires. It wasn't revenge, it was survival. When I pulled into my apartment building's parking lot, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from my old engineering team filled the screen. "Emma, the demo system crashed. Nobody can access Helix. Servers asking for license verification. Do you know what's happening?" I smiled faintly and set the phone aside. Of course I knew. Helix was doing exactly what I'd taught it to do: protect itself. I walked into my apartment and opened my personal laptop. The familiar access sequence appeared, a private key only I possessed. The Helix admin interface looked as calm as ever, operations stable, except for one small line at the bottom: license check, invalid. Employer status, inactive. I stared at those words like looking at a period at the end of a long sentence. No anger, no regret. Just confirmation that my system was more loyal than people ever were. While Novamind was probably holding an emergency meeting, I opened the Helix log directory. The data showed multiple attempts to reboot the server, all failed. The system had locked itself at the root developer privilege level. No one but me could unlock it. My phone rang. Janet, the lead developer. Her voice trembled. "Emma, Jonathan's losing it. He's blaming you for not transferring access." Horizon's investors just arrived, and everything's a mess. I took a slow breath, glancing out the window. Austin remained calm. Nobody out there knew that a $1 billion company had just collapsed in minutes. Janet, stay out of it. Tell your team to sit tight. All access points have already been disabled. Emma, what are you going to do? Nothing, I said quietly. Helix will handle it. I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the fan and the soft reflection of the LED light on my desk. I closed my eyes, remembering every line of code, every algorithm I'd ever refined. I hadn't created Helix just to analyze data. I'd built it to know who deserved to control it. An hour later, an email from Novamind's legal department appeared in my inbox. Request for immediate transfer of Helix ownership to avoid contractual violation. I opened it. The writing was the same as always, rigid, threatening, and clueless. I smiled and replied simply, Helix ownership belongs to Reed Labs, LLC. Novamind's usage rights were valid only during my employment. That period has ended. No emotion, no argument. I sent the email, closed my laptop, and got up to make another cup of coffee. It tasted more bitter than usual that morning, but somehow it tasted like freedom. I knew Jonathan was panicking. And when powerful men panic, they always do something stupid. But that, my friend, is the fun part of the story. I've always believed the most expensive mistakes begin with two simple words. It's simple. And at exactly 9 that morning, just 1 hour after I walked out of Novamind, Jonathan Pierce said those exact words to the investors waiting in the conference room on the 29th floor. If I had been there, I probably would have laughed. Because with Helix, nothing was ever simple. I sat in a small cafe on South Congress, the kind that served cappuccinos thicker than any apology I'd ever heard from a CEO. Sunlight poured through the window, glinting off my laptop screen where the Helix dashboard was open, lines of logs streaming endlessly. Novamind's servers were starting up, then shutting down again, like a lunatic trying to open a door with the neighbor's key. I knew exactly what was happening upstairs on the 29th floor, the $1 billion performance of Jonathan Pierce. Inside the grand conference room, Jonathan appeared in a perfect gray suit, his hair slicked back like he had an entire styling team on call. Beside him stood Tyler Pierce, his nephew, who had joined the company less than 24 hours ago. Tyler held a tablet, grinning as he live-streamed the demo on the company's internal network like it was a Hollywood premiere. Good morning, everyone, he said into the camera. Today, Novamind presents Helix, the smartest medical AI platform in the world. One of the investors raised an eyebrow, but Jonathan gave a charming smile. No problem. Tyler just wants to share the excitement. Let's begin. He turned his laptop around and typed in the familiar command. The Helix logo began to spin, blue light washing across Jonathan's smug face. For a few seconds, everything looked perfect. Then, ping. A red message flashed across the screen. Authorization expired. Contact primary license holder, Reed Labs, LLC. The silence in the room was so heavy, it felt like someone had muted the entire world. A nervous engineer tried typing the command again. Access denied. Jonathan frowned, but forced a calm tone. Probably a verification issue. Give us a moment, we'll restart. He glanced at Tyler. Turn off the camera. But, Uncle, over 800 people are watching. Turn it off, Jonathan snapped, through gritted teeth. Tyler fumbled with the tablet, but it was already too late. The stream had spread beyond the internal network, watched by thousands of employees. At the cafe, I rested my chin on my hand, watching the log feeds scroll across the screen. The number of access attempts tripled. They tried bypassing admin rights, resetting the server, and creating new accounts. Helix declined every single one, politely but firmly. License validation failed. Please contact the system architect. I took a slow sip of coffee, smiling faintly. Helix wasn't being hacked. It was simply doing what I built it to do, protect itself from those who didn't deserve it. In the boardroom, investor Richard Hale leaned forward, his voice calm. Mr. Pierce, it seems the system doesn't recognize your ownership. Who exactly is Reed Labs, LLC? Jonathan swallowed hard. Just an old internal name. A minor paperwork error. A paperwork error, Richard repeated, each word clipped. According to our legal documentation, Reed Labs is the patent holder for Helix. Founder, Emma Reed. The temperature in the room dropped. Tyler turned to his uncle, face drained of color. You fired her this morning, didn't you? Jonathan's jaw tightened. She has no authority here. A young engineer at the end of the table spoke up, voice trembling. Sir, according to the license terms, access remains valid only while she's employed. She was terminated at 7:59, so enough. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. The coffee cup tipped, spilling across the documents, a dark brown streak spreading like a wound. And right then, Tyler whispered, Uncle. The live stream's still on. Jonathan froze, his face flushing red. What? Every investor looked down at their tablets. They were watching the CEO of Novamind, sweating, furious, and unraveling, live. Back at the cafe, I saw the spike in network traffic. One of the streams read stream, novamind.ai/live. I let out a soft laugh. And just like that, the whole world watched Jonathan Pierce lose his mask during the very demo he thought would put his company on the cover of Forbes. By noon, the headlines exploded. Novamind demo fails due to Helix software licensing error. Insider source. Lead engineer fired hours before presentation. Novamind stock dropped 18% in 3 hours. The Horizon investors canceled their follow-up meeting. And Jonathan, according to Janet, smashed the presentation screen and blamed the entire engineering team. I didn't feel triumphant, only a strange sense of calm. I wasn't after revenge. I just wanted the truth to surface. Helix hadn't destroyed anyone. It had only reflected the true worth of the person controlling it. If Jonathan wanted to control everything, then he'd just learned the first rule of technology. A system is only loyal to the one who built it. That afternoon, Austin looked as ordinary as ever, as if the world hadn't just watched a billion-dollar company crush itself in 15 minutes of live broadcast. On the drive home, the radio ran a short piece of news, a single line slipping by. Novamind Technologies drops 18% in market value after this morning's failed demo. Just one sentence, but to me, it sounded like a peaceful symphony. I got home close to noon. Sunlight streamed through the windows, spilling across a desk covered in papers and hardware. I opened my laptop and checked the Helix dashboard. Everything was stable, data safe. Servers are responding normally. What caught my attention was an automatic report Helix had sent me, a list of every unauthorized login attempt since morning. Dozens of IPs from Russia, Romania, Malaysia, and one internal address from Novamind. I let out a quiet laugh. Quick move, Jonathan. From panic to hiring hackers in a matter of hours. Classic. I poured another cup of coffee and opened my inbox. The first message came from Novamind's legal department. Urgent request. Transfer Helix system access immediately. Failure to comply may be considered a legal violation. Right below it sat the second email from Jonathan Pierce himself. Emma, please cooperate. You know this company can't operate without Helix. I propose that you transfer ownership back to Novamind in exchange for fair compensation. When I reached the word fair, I smiled faintly. I'd never seen anyone use it so shamelessly. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Clara Vaughn, the attorney who helped me establish Reed Labs 3 years ago. Clara, they've started sending threats, I said. A soft laugh came from the other end. He didn't wait long, did he? I guess that within 48 hours they'll leak something to the press. What should I do? Nothing. Sometimes silence is the strongest answer. But make sure every Helix file is stored somewhere safe. I'll send the official ownership confirmation letter. We don't attack. We protect. Just like Helix. Exactly. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Janet calling. Emma, you should hear this. Jonathan just held a company-wide meeting. He claimed Helix was stolen and said he's preparing to sue you for professional misconduct. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Did you get any recording? Yes. And one more thing. Some people in the IT team said Jonathan hired an external cybersecurity firm to regain control. They're scanning the system like crazy. I opened my laptop and logged into the secondary monitoring channel. Just as Janet said, dozens of unknown access attempts were trying to breach Helix's third security layer. Don't worry, I said. They're attacking the front door while I moved all the keys to the back long ago. Evening settled in. I refilled my glass and watched the sunset fade across the wall. A plan was forming in my mind, not for revenge, but to bring the truth to light the right way. Logged into NovaMind's old internal archive, where I still had read access from my former lead engineer credentials. With a few clicks, I found what I was looking for: a report of patient medical data transfers to foreign servers. A report signed by Jonathan Pierce. Date: 2 months ago. I read every line, my heartbeat quickening. Helix had never been designed to process data outside the US. This wasn't just unethical, it was a federal violation. And Jonathan knew it. Now I understand why he wanted his nephew to take control of the system. It wasn't about mentorship, it was about manipulation, bypassing the board's oversight. I sat quietly for a moment. This was no longer personal, this was national security. I sent the entire file to Clara with a short note. Prepare for public release. I won't stay silent if they strike first. Clara replied almost instantly. Understood. I've contacted the firm Ford and Brennan. They represent Horizon Capital. If Jonathan escalates, we'll disclose everything. I stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. No hackers, no cyber war, just the truth. That night, Jonathan began his media offensive exactly as predicted. Smaller outlets ran headlines. Former lead engineer accused of stealing intellectual property. An insider source claims Emma Reed deliberately caused the Helix system failure. The stories spread fast, but backfired even faster. People who had worked with me began to speak up. Engineers, data specialists, even assistants. One wrote on LinkedIn, "If Emma stole anything, it was with the same hands that built this company." Another commented, "No one understands Helix better than Emma. Maybe she's the one we should be listening to." That's the power of silence. It makes others speak for you. Around midnight, a new alert popped up on my screen. Unauthorized access attempt blocked. Origin, novamind.admin.server. They still hadn't given up. I sat up and activated preservation mode, the highest level of Helix defense. A calm blue message appeared. System integrity secured. All external control is disabled. I leaned back and smiled faintly. Jonathan Pierce could shout, threaten, and flex his power all he wanted. I had Helix and patience. In the world of technology, counterattack doesn't always mean violence. Sometimes it just means sitting still and listening as the system quietly locks the door behind your enemy. The next morning, I woke up to the pale light of dawn. Austin was calm, birds singing on the balcony, the sound of cars starting to hum in the streets below. If you didn't know what had happened, you'd never guess that just a few hours earlier, one of the city's top tech companies had begun to destroy itself from the inside. I brewed my coffee and opened my laptop. The Helix dashboard glowed steady green, quiet, smooth, almost mocking. My inbox, however, was not. 37 emails overnight. Most were from journalists, a few from former colleagues, and 2 from Jonathan Pierce's lawyers. The first one opened with fake politeness. Ms. Reed, to avoid misunderstanding, we request that you restore access to the Helix system to support the internal investigation. Otherwise, we will be forced to take this matter to court. The second one dropped the courtesy altogether. Your actions may constitute misappropriation of intellectual property and financial damage to NovaMind. Consider the legal consequences carefully. I set my cup down and laughed. The way they wrote made it sound like they were trying to scare a freshman who accidentally copied a line of code, not the person who wrote over 2 million of them. Around 9 a.m., local news reported, NovaMind CEO Jonathan Pierce denies copyright violation allegations, claims Helix was unlawfully seized by former lead engineer Emma Reed. The broadcast showed him in a black suit and red tie, confidence so rehearsed it bordered on parody. Helix belongs to NovaMind, he said. We are working with authorities to regain control. I watched the screen and didn't feel angry, just amused. Jonathan looked like a kid trying to convince his mother that the dog ate his homework. By noon, Janet called. Emma, listen, things are getting out of hand. Jonathan just held an emergency meeting. He said he's taking you to court and hired a hacker group from Eastern Europe to recover access. I leaned back in my chair and smiled softly. I'd say they'll start in a few hours. Emma, you're not worried? No. I've been preparing for this for 3 years. She paused. Can Jonathan actually win? I looked at the sunlight glinting off my coffee cup. No, Janet. He can make more noise than I, but he'll never be smarter. That afternoon, Helix sent an alert. Strange data packets flooding in from multiple countries, encrypted, sophisticated, but not enough to pass the sixth security layer. I opened the monitor and watched the lines of code roll like rain. Helix responded with a message I had written 3 years ago for this exact moment. Unauthorized modification attempt detected. Sandbox mode activated. I smiled. Welcome to the maze, Jonathan. At Novamind, as Janet later told me, chaos erupted. Jonathan and his hired cybersecurity team were celebrating, convinced they had broken into the core. They watched as Helix's source code appeared across the screen, line after perfect line like a treasure map. Jonathan laughed, loudly, slamming his hand on the table. See? I told you, just a matter of time. No one realized it wasn't the real Helix. It was a simulated clone, a honeypot I'd built in the first year, identical in every detail, except that the moment anyone touched it, it recorded every IP, every location, every identity, and triggered a full legal trace protocol. And right on schedule, 20 minutes later, a notification appeared on my screen. Data collection complete. External breach logged and reported to the Federal Cybercrime Division. I leaned back and closed my eyes. They just turned themselves in, Helix. That evening, my phone rang. Clara Vaughn. Emma. The federal investigators contacted me. They've received a cyber attack report originating from Novamind. You didn't touch anything, did you? I only let Helix defend itself. Good. Let them dig deeper. Jonathan Pierce just turned a civil case into a federal criminal investigation. I laughed. He actually filed a lawsuit against me this morning. Clara paused, then said, Perfect. We'll countersue. But let him talk first. Don't respond. Don't appear. We win with patience. Like chess. Exactly. And he just opened with the wrong move. 2 days later, the media flipped. A major tech journal published an analysis. Documents show Helix belongs to Reed Labs, not Novamind. Patent registered under Emma Reed in 2018, 2 years before Novamind was founded. The story spread across LinkedIn, Reddit, and Twitter. Comments flooded in. She's the one who actually built Helix. Novamind violated its own contract. Classic. Fire the engineer, lose the company. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. For the first time, my silence spoke louder than all their defenses combined. That night, as Austin lit up under the skyline, I sat by the window, watching the traffic below. A message from Janet appeared. Jonathan's losing it. Legal teams falling apart. Investors pulling out. I read it, then deleted it. Not because I didn't care, but because I had already moved on. I was no longer fighting to defend my name. I was preparing to rebuild my future. And Jonathan Pierce, though he didn't know it yet, had just handed me the most valuable thing of all. Freedom. 3 days after the lawsuit, I woke to the sound of rain drumming hard against the roof. Austin was soaked in one of those heavy, stubborn storms that seemed to fall out of pure anger, as if the sky itself were avenging someone. I sat by the window with a cup of hot coffee, reading the morning headlines. Novamind plunges 42% in market value within 72 hours. Federal investigators confirm an active probe into the system breach and data violations. CEO Jonathan Pierce declines to comment. A short video followed, showing Jonathan hurrying past reporters. Pale-faced, tie crooked, hair once slicked back, now wild, like he'd just walked through a hurricane. Anyone who ever doubted karma should probably watch that clip. While the media burned with chaos, my routine stayed the same. Morning, coffee, system logs. Afternoon, legal emails. Evening, call my mother and tell her everything's better than ever. Helix kept running smoothly, loyal as ever. Every time I logged in, it greeted me with the same line of code I'd written years ago. Welcome, architect. 4 simple words, yet every time I saw them, I remembered why I started all this. Not for money, not for recognition, but to build something that could help people survive, not make someone richer. That afternoon, Clara called. Good news, Emma. Jonathan has officially been suspended by the board. I leaned back, exhaling softly. How long? Permanently. They appointed an interim CEO, but I doubt the company will last. Horizon Capital pulled all funding, and the court rejected Jonathan's emergency request to reclaim Helix. You won. No, Clara, I just survived. She gave a quiet laugh. That's enough. But Emma, you should think about what's next. A new door is opening. Horizon wants to meet you. That evening, as the city lights shimmered outside my window, I sat alone in my apartment. The soft glow of my laptop reflected across my face, showing a woman who looked calm but still carried the fire of years that hadn't yet gone out. On the screen was an email from Clara Vaughn. Subject line: Horizon Capital, Partnership, Proposal, Project Helix Global. I read every word carefully. They wanted to invest $1.3 billion to restructure the entire Helix system, turning it into an independent company focused on global medical AI. Exactly the vision I had once proposed, the one Jonathan had dismissed as unprofitable. This time, no one could say no. Meanwhile, NovaMind was falling apart. Janet sent me a leaked internal memo. Engineering teams resigning in waves. Backup systems are failing. Partners withdrawing contracts. Jonathan, though suspended, still refused to let go. He hired a personal spokesperson, appeared on television, declaring that he'd been betrayed. I watched the interview in silence. His voice was hoarse, his eyes exhausted, but his arrogance was still intact. I built NovaMind from nothing, and now the people I trusted most have stabbed me in the back. If you didn't know the truth, you might almost pity him. But I felt nothing. Jonathan never understood that trust doesn't mean ownership, and when he confused the two, he buried his company with his own hands. On the 4th day after the lawsuit, Horizon invited me to their downtown Austin headquarters. The glass tower gleamed like a block of crystal in the sun. As I entered the lobby, I saw Clara waiting with 2 others, Elliot Shaw, investment director, and Marcia Lane, head of technology development. Elliot reached out his hand. Ms. Reed, thank you for coming. We've been following your case, and frankly, we're impressed by how you handled it. How do I handle it? I raised an eyebrow. By doing nothing, he laughed. We like people who know when to stay quiet and let others destroy themselves. Everyone at the table laughed, and I just smiled faintly. They outlined the plan: establish Helix Global Systems, headquartered in Texas, with a European branch in the first year. Horizon would fund it. I would remain chief architect and majority shareholder. My former engineering team would be invited to rejoin. When Elliot finished, I asked only one question. We'll do this ethically, right? No commercialization of patient data, no military use of AI. Marcia nodded. That's exactly what we want from you. A system with real human value. I tightened my grip on the glass of water, my throat dry from a mix of relief and emotion. I nodded. Then I'm in. That night, I returned home and opened Helix once more. On the screen, I typed a new line of code. Project name, Helix Global, status, reborn. Beneath it, the system replied, acknowledged. Soft blue light filled the room. I sat quietly, listening to the faint sound of rain outside the glass. Jonathan Pierce might have lost everything: his reputation, his company, his power. But me, I only lost 7:59 a.m. on one bad day. In return, I gained everything else: my future. 2 weeks after the meeting at Horizon Capital, I stood in front of a new glass building in South Austin. On the silver sign in raised letters, it read, Helix Global Systems. I looked at it for a long moment, not because of how striking it was, but because of the quiet. The building wasn't huge or flashy, but it felt right, as if everything had finally returned to where it belonged. Inside, my old team had already gathered. Janet was setting up the new servers, David was adjusting the main screen in the lobby, And Sarah, the one who cried the day she left Novamind, was pressing the Helix Global logo onto the wall. "Looks good," she asked, glancing back at me. I studied the silver double helix reflecting the lights. "It looks like what we should have had all along." For a few seconds, the room was silent. Then came the sound of keyboards, quiet laughter, and the soft drip of coffee, the sound of a real beginning. That afternoon, Horizon sent a media team to film a launch video. I never liked cameras, but they said, "You're the soul of Helix. Without you, there's no story to tell." They filmed me walking down the hallway, talking about our new mission: AI for people, not for profit. I kept it short, just enough for everyone to know Helix was no longer a tool for anyone's greed. After the shoot, a message popped up on my phone: "Game's not over. Jay." I stared at it for a while, then deleted it. Jonathan Pierce still hadn't disappeared. I knew him. Men like that don't stop until they've destroyed whatever's left. 2 days later, the headlines hit. Former Novamind CEO plans to relaunch his own version of Helix. Insiders claim Jonathan Pierce is working with international hacker groups. I sat in my new office, hands resting on the keyboard, heartbeat steady. No fear, no surprise, just pity. Jonathan was doing exactly what I expected. When he lost control, he tried to rebuild it. But copies always fail in the same way. They lack the soul of the creator. That evening, Janet burst into my office, breathless. "Emma, you need to see this." She turned on the big screen. A video was spreading online. Jonathan Pierce on stage at a tech conference, the banner behind him reading Helix AI Reborn. He announced that he had fully restored the Helix system and was ready to unveil a faster, stronger, completely independent version. The audience applauded, but only for a few seconds. When Jonathan hit run, the system booted, then froze. The screen flickered, flashing a single red line: unauthorized use of protected code. Source: Reed Labs, LLC. Laughter rippled through the room. Jonathan tried typing more commands, but the system only responded faster. Violation detected. Security report sent to the Federal Cybercrime Division. His face went pale. Cameras caught everything. The clip went viral overnight. The next morning, Clara called. "Emma, have you seen the news? The FBI just entered Novamind headquarters." I sat down, strangely calm. For the previous breach, right? For more than that. They found evidence that Jonathan altered real patient records to test a faulty Helix clone. He'll be facing trial. I closed my eyes, silent for a while. Not joy, not triumph, just the feeling of closure. That afternoon, reporters crowded outside Helix Global. "Do you have any comment on Jonathan Pierce's arrest? Do you think he deserved it?" I answered simply. He had a chance to do the right thing. Instead, he chose control over collaboration. Helix only did what it was built to do: reflect the truth. One reporter asked, "Are you planning to sue Novamind?" I shook my head. Helix Global won't look backward. The future is where the work belongs. That night, I stood on the top floor of the new building, gazing out over the city lights. Traffic shimmered below. Somewhere out there, the headlines were flashing: "The Fall of Novamind," "The Rise of Helix Global," "Emma Reed, the woman redefining ethics in AI." I didn't care about titles. All I ever wanted was the freedom to build something no one could corrupt. Helix Global was truly alive now. No more fear, no more chains. We weren't just restarting a project. We were redefining how the world understood intelligence itself. Before turning off the lights, I opened the Helix Global console and typed one final line of code. "All systems are active. Begin phase 1. The response appeared instantly, glowing bright across the screen. "Welcome back, architect." I smiled. Outside, the rain had stopped. And for me, every storm had finally passed. 3 months after Helix Global officially went live, autumn had settled over Austin. The sky was clearer, the air cooler, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. I sat by the window of my new office, a cup of chamomile tea still steaming on the desk, watching the trees outside sway in the afternoon light. The Helix Global building wasn't tall, but every floor glowed, not with ambition, but with the quiet light of people working for what they believed was right. I thought back to the first day, when there were only 3 of us and an idea scribbled on a wrinkled piece of paper. Back then, Helix was just a dream. Now it had become a belief, shared by hundreds of engineers, doctors, researchers, and patients around the world. In 3 months, Helix Global had partnered with 5 major hospitals in the US and Europe. The new system helped doctors predict early risks of breast cancer, heart disease, and diabetes using genetic data, without storing any patient's personal information. That was what made me proudest. Not that we were ahead of competitors, but that we hadn't betrayed our ethics to get there. Whenever people asked for our secret, I always answered the same way. We don't build AI to replace people. We build it to remind people they still matter. Last week, Horizon hosted a technology forum and invited me to speak. The hall was warm with golden light, hundreds of people sitting quietly, waiting. I hadn't prepared a speech, just a small piece of paper. I began with a question. How many of you have ever been underestimated just because you refused to follow an unreasonable order? Almost half the hands in the room went up. I nodded. Then congratulations. You already have something in common with me. They fired me at 7:59 in the morning, and I thought it was the end. Turns out it was only the beginning. Laughter rippled through the crowd, not loud, but kind. I told them about Helix, how one small decision could change an entire industry. I didn't mention Jonathan or the lawsuit or Novamind's fall. I just spoke about belief and the limits of human responsibility when holding too much power. When I finished, I read a line I'd written for myself 3 years earlier. Don't build a system just to make it smarter than people. Build it to make people better. The entire hall rose in applause. I bowed, and for the first time, felt something lift inside me. A grudge finally released, a wound that no longer ached. That evening, I drove out to visit my mother in the suburbs. She still lived in the small house with the lavender garden where I'd written my first lines of code. She was making tea when I arrived. You look better, she said with a smile. Your face has its light back. I laughed. Helix is doing well, Mom. Horizon's investing more, and next week we're opening our own data center. I just never thought it would take nearly 10 years to find my original dream again, she poured the tea and set a cup in front of me. You didn't lose 10 years. You spent 9 of them learning that sometimes you have to lose everything to know what's worth keeping. I went quiet, staring at her hands, thinner now, but steady as ever. Those hands had signed the papers that created Reed Labs when I was too afraid, when I didn't yet believe I deserved to protect my own work. She looked out toward the garden, where the lavender swayed in the wind. Has Jonathan Pierce been sentenced yet? Waiting for trial. But I think he's already served his real sentence. He lost everything, his reputation, his friends, the loyalty of everyone who once stood by him. She nodded softly. People don't lose because they're defeated. They lose because they refuse to learn when they fail. That night, I stayed over. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, falling across the desk where my old laptop still sat. I opened it and typed a few test commands for something new. Helix Global Community Mode, an idea I'd carried for years, giving students and researchers free access to machine learning for healthcare and education. The screen flashed. Helix Community Mode. Prototype active. I looked at it, and for the first time, I didn't see Helix as my creation anymore. It had become a legacy, a symbol for a generation that believed technology could save lives, not just make profits. Before leaving that afternoon, I stepped into the garden. The scent of lavender drifted through the air, gentle and clean. I breathed deeply and smiled. Novamind was gone. Jonathan Pierce had vanished from the headlines. But Helix lived on, not loud, not showy, but steady and enduring, like the lavender swaying in the wind. And if someone asked me today where the road to success begins, I wouldn't talk about code or capital or technology. I'd just say this. It began one morning at 7:59 when I realized that sometimes losing your job isn't the end. It's how life pushes you onto the right path. 3 years had passed since the name Helix Global Systems first appeared in the morning financial news. By now, it was no longer the spectacular revenge story the press once celebrated, but something far quieter and more enduring, like the steady heartbeat of humane technology. Helix was present in hundreds of hospitals, research centers, and universities. I no longer managed everything as before. My old team, the same people who had walked out of Novamind with me, had each become independent leaders. I had stepped back into an advisory role, writing books and occasionally teaching at the University of Texas. Whenever a student asked me, Professor, how did you dare to stand up to a giant corporation? I always smiled. I didn't dare. I just refused to bow. Once, a student brought an old newspaper to class, the front page of Tech Chronicle from 2025. The headline reading, Fired Engineer Now Controls $1.3 billion Technology. She asked, Do you feel proud when you look back? I looked at the photo of myself from that day, sharp eyes, tight jaw, every line pulled taut with tension. I smiled. No, I'm not proud because I won. I'm proud because I didn't lose myself to win. A few months ago, while clearing out my old office, I found a tiny black USB drive, the same one that had once thrown Novamind into chaos. Now it was nothing more than a fragment of memory, a piece of the past I neither resented nor needed. I placed it in a small box and labeled it 759, keep as a reminder. Not to remember Jonathan Pierce or Novamind, but to remember that everything begins in a single moment between fear and courage, and all it takes is leaning toward the right side for life to change forever. Jonathan Pierce never appeared in the media again. I heard he left the United States, living quietly somewhere in Europe, no longer involved in technology. A part of me wanted to believe he had learned something. The rest of me, honestly, didn't care. What I valued far more were the people I met afterward. A doctor in Boston wrote to thank us because Helix helped save a 38-year-old heart patient. A student in Kenya used the Helix community version to detect early signs of malaria in rural areas. A mother wrote that her autistic son had begun to communicate better through the Helix Speech AI program. No article could ever capture things like that. Those were the real rewards, the kind no CEO, no contract, no profit margin could compare to. Last month, Horizon hosted the third anniversary of Helix Global. The ballroom shimmered with light and laughter. Clara Vaughn was the same as ever, calm, sharp, and always arriving exactly when she was needed. As I stepped onto the stage, she leaned close and said softly, Emma, you changed how people see power and technology. You didn't just build a system, you built a philosophy. I replied, I only fixed a bug in the world, one called greed. The room burst into laughter, then rose in applause. In that moment, I could see it clearly. No one remembered the lawsuit anymore, or Novamind, or Jonathan Pierce. All that remained was Helix and what it stood for. Technology with a conscience. That night, I went back to my old apartment, still on the 14th floor, still overlooking the Colorado River. I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The familiar message appeared on the screen. Welcome, architect. But this time I typed one more line. Not the architect anymore, just the believer. Helix responded, like an old friend smiling back. Acknowledged. I looked out the window. Below, the city lights rippled across the river like 1,000 drifting memories. Everything felt still, peaceful, complete. And I thought, if someone asked me now, if you could go back to that morning, 7:59, would you still refuse to train the CEO's nephew? I would smile and say, yes, the same. Because sometimes to begin the most important chapter of your life, you need a big red line through the first one. I closed the laptop. Outside, dawn was rising, its first light shimmering across the water. A new day beginning, soft as a breath. And I, the woman who once lost her job at 7:59 in the morning, felt nothing but gratitude, because without that morning, there never would have been Helix Global. I took a slow sip of wine and smiled quietly. Sometimes what they take away is just a job, but what you get back is yourself.